Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all 389 Bach chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Was Gott tut, das ist wohlgetan, which translates to what God does that is done well. This is a pretty quaint chorale. The analysis wasn't too difficult. I'd say the most interesting aspect of the chorale is right here at the beginning of the second system. We have these two close proximity cadences, these short phrases that are close to one another by their melodic motion. But we'll talk about that cadence when we get to it. But other than that, we're in the key of G major. We start with a tonic triad in root position with some passing tones, and we end with a tonic triad. After the pickup, we have G, B, D, and G, just another tonic triad and a rotation of the upper voices. F sharp, A, D, and A. That's a D major triad in first inversion, so 5-6. And then we have G, G, D, and B. That's another root position tonic triad. We then have C, G, E, and E. That is a root position 4 chord, C major. And then we have some passing tones in the inner voices. And when we see passing tones going from a 4 chord going up, sometimes they turn into a passing 7 chord, like in this case, F sharp, A, C, and E. So we have a passing 7-7 chord, but this time it's in second inversion. 4 is often coupled with 7 in that way. Not always, but usually when we're going to a tonic triad, I would wager to say that it does. Then we have B, B, G, and D. That's a tonic triad in root position. The passing tone in the bass. And then we have D, A, F sharp, and D. That is a root position D major triad. We have this delayed 7th here as well, as Bach often does, but we usually see it in this the alto or the tenor rather than in the melody, so that's interesting that we see it in the melody there. And then we cadence on G major. However, this is an imperfect authentic cadence rather than a perfect authentic cadence, because B is in the melody, not the tonic. Okay, so moving on, we have a perfect authentic cadence still in the key of G major. It's kind of interesting that we haven't seen any chromaticism up until this point. It's kind of unusual that we see a lot of development in the key of G major without branching out. C, C, G, and E. That's a root position C major triad. No passing 7th this time. It's not going to 1. It's actually going to D, A, F sharp, and D, which is a D major triad, so that could be the reason why, but we don't see any of the other voices moving upwards by step to create that passing 7th chord. Then we have E, E, G, and C, which is a 4 chord, again, but this time it's in first inversion. This is kind of like a little deceptive progression. It's like going to 6, but instead of 6, it's going to 4-6, because they both share a bass. We then have some passing tones in the bass, in the alto, and you'll see here that this is a passing 7 chord, F sharp, A, C, and E. So this is a passing 7-7 chord, and you'll see that this is going to 1, so G, D, B, and B. So I think that that's kind of what Bach is looking for. 4 is going to 1, add a passing 7 there maybe. If 4 is going to 5, doesn't matter as much, or maybe to another chord, who knows. But it's when you can get that F sharp bridging the E and the G, I imagine. Okay, we have some more passing tones here. F sharp, D, A, and B. That is kind of like a passing 2 chord, but I don't think that really contributes too much to the chord progression, because we're just going to E, E, G, and C, which is another first inversion C major triad. We have some non-chord tones in the outer voices, a passing tone, and just another non-chord tone here. I think it's called an escape tone when you step into it and leap out of it. But it doesn't really matter too much. It's a non-chord tone regardless. And here we have C, E, G, and A, which is an A minor 7 over C. Bach loves his 2-6-5 chords. We then have D, D, F sharp, and A with a passing 7th in the tenor. It's a root position D major triad. And then we cadence on G major. 2-6-5-5-1, one of Bach's perfect authentic cadence formulas. That's pretty typical. I wouldn't even just attribute it to Bach. We're looking at Bach, so it seems like it's like one of his formulas, but I think it's just something that's characteristic of the time. All right, our next cadence is a half cadence. It sounds like a half cadence to me. The melody doesn't really outline D major, even though we have a C sharp in the bass. I think that's just a secondary dominant. So we haven't modulated yet. G, B, G, and D, that's just another root position tonic triad. The bass leaps up an octave, and there's some voice exchange in the upper voices. C, C, G, and E, another root position 4 chord with a passing tone in the tenor. Notice how this 4 doesn't have a passing 7 because it's not going to 1. I'm noticing that more now that I'm looking at the chorales with that in mind. And then we have C sharp, A, G, and E. That's A7 over C sharp, which would be 5, 6, 5 of 5, as A is the dominant of D, which is our dominant. And usually that's something that's indicative of half cadences for me, is that we have the A, or the supertonic in the melody. I find that half cadences more often than not don't have their tonic. In this case, it would be D in the melody. Sometimes they do. Most of the time they don't. Most of the time they have the fifth of the chord in there. All right, so moving on. We have this really interesting cadence here, and I don't really know what to call it, but we're going to analyze up to it. And to me, it doesn't sound like we've modulated. Or does it? I don't know. We'll talk about it when we get to it. D, D, F sharp, and A. That is another root position 5 chord. We have a passing chord here, E, G, A, and D. That's not really analyzable, so those are just passing tones. F sharp, A, and D. That's just a 5-6 chord. D major over F sharp. And I write out the Roman numeral again because it's a new system, so just to remind ourselves. We have a passing tone on in the alto. We then have B, B, F sharp, and D, which is a B minor chord, kind of like a deceptive progression here, from 5 going to something other than our tonic. And then we have E minor, E, B, E, and G, which is a 6 chord. So what's going on here? What kind of cadence is this? Well, this is one of the more fascinating cadences, because if we were to look at this in the key of E minor, B minor would be our minor 5, and E minor would be our tonic. However, I don't think this cadence really sounds like that. It sounds more sequential to me. It sounds like Bach is going from 4 to a dominant, and then from 3 to a 6 chord. I think if we look at the cycle of fifths and we see where chords want to go, we see that 4 wants to go to 7, and 7 wants to go to 3, and 3 wants to go to 6. And if we look at the bass, we have 4 going to 7, going to 3, going to 6. Even though the harmonies are not using the bass as the root of the chord, that doesn't mean the bass can't outline the circle of fifth, or the cycle of fifths sequence, this falling fifths. So I think that's what's going on. Instead of cadencing on a diminished chord here, which Bach could have done. Bach cadences on 5 as cadencing on a diminished. I don't think it's unheard of. I'm not sure if we've done it in the chorales so far, but I can't remember any instances of us cadencing on a diminished chord. But a 5 chord, especially a 5-7 chord, is 75% diminished, because if you take away the root, all it is a 7 chord. So there's some intention going on here, and really what I think is going on is there's like a sequential progression going on. I'm not even sure I have vocabulary to describe what this cadence is, but I'm going to go ahead and just say that it's sequential, because there's this harmonic, or this melodic pattern, or what would I call it? It wouldn't be a melodic pattern. This pattern in the bass that is outlining the fifth sequence, which is very typical of Baroque music. Actually, just Western classical music in general, but especially the Baroque is associated with sequences. And it's really interesting. I don't know what to call it. It kind of sounds like E minor to me, but with the absence of the dominant, I can't say that we've modulated. It doesn't sound like we've modulated. But all in all, we'll leave it at that. It's a very fascinating cadence, and if you have some insight on what the cadence might be, let me know in the comments section. That'd be great. Okay, so next chord is another E minor triad, but the voices have rotated, except for the bass. That stays the same. If we look ahead, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of D major. When we cadence in the key of the dominant, I think Bach uses authentic cadences in the key of the dominant and half cadences pretty interchangeably, depending on how he chooses to harmonize the melody. So I think some of them ride the line and it's harder to tell, but Bach isn't afraid to tonicize the dominant before we move back to the tonic, as opposed to just cadencing on the dominant and staying in the tonic key throughout. Regardless, I think we modulate to the key of D major here, and this E minor chord is our 2 chord, because we get C sharps pretty close afterwards. So we have C sharp, A, E, and A. That is a 5 chord, an A major in first inversion, passing tone in the bass. So 2 going to 5, that's also another giveaway that we're in a new key, because the progression makes sense after the fact. Sometimes it doesn't, but it's helpful when it does. Alright, then we have A, D, and G. This D, I reckon, is this is like a 4-3 suspension figure going on, or an appoggiatura, whatever you want to call it. It's an accented non-chord tone, and all this is doing is respelling the chord as a root position A7 chord. So 7, but not 5-3. This would just be 7-3, because we don't have an E in the chord. That would be the 5 over the bass. So just 7-3 here. That's interesting. We then have D, A, D, and F sharp. 5-7 typically goes to the tonic, which it is here because we're in the key of D major right now. And then we have B, G, D, and G. That is a first inversion G major triad, so a 4 chord, a 4-6 more specifically. And here we have F sharp, A, and F sharp. That spells out a passing 1-6-4 chord, I guess, if that matters. It is a passing chord. I guess we could write it there. It doesn't do any harm because this is just a D major in second inversion. But it's not really being used in the context that a second inversion tonic triad is used in a cadential situation. We know that it's used as an accessory to 5 rather than as a passing chord between two other chords, I guess. We have G, B, D, and E. We know that Bach loves his 2-6-5 chords. This is E minor over G, E minor 7 over G. And then we have A, C sharp, and E, our 5 chord with a passing 7th. Bach loves passing 7ths all over the place. I try to say passing 7th to distinguish from the rest of the passing tones to show how commonly Bach uses passing 7ths. And then, of course, we cadence on 1. And it's perfect authentic because the tonic is in the melody. Alright, last phrase. We end on a perfect authentic cadence in the key of G major. And the same way that a perfect authentic cadence, or just an authentic cadence in the key of the dominant, introduces a 5 in the tonic key, I think we've modulated back to the key of G major, and this is our common chord. Especially because we have a G major triad after the fact. B, G, G, and D. It's a tonic triad in first inversion with a passing 7th in the alto. C, G, E, and C. That is a root position C major triad. And then we have F sharp and A here moving up. That is a passing 7-7 chord, which is often, like I mentioned earlier, accompanying 4 when you're moving from 4 to the tonic, which we are here, G, B, D, and B, which is just a tonic triad in root position. We have some passing tones, C, E, G, and B. I guess that is technically a passing 4-7 chord, but I don't know. I don't know. It just doesn't feel right to me to analyze, to be honest. It just doesn't really feel like it's contributing to the progression. It is, however, going to a 5 chord, which is interesting. But the fact that the G is still in the bass makes me feel like the G is still there. And really, I think this is just a continuation of this pattern, this melody in the tenor. All right, we have D, D, F sharp, and A, which is a root position 5 chord. We have a passing 7th in the bass. We then have B, D, G, and B, which is a first inversion G major triad, 1-6. We leap down, but we get a passing, or not a passing tone. We get the same sort of tone that we had here. It's like an escape tone, I think is what it's called. Not 100% certain. It's been a while since I've actually looked at the types of chord tones. But it's the only one it's the only permutation that I don't use regularly. So when I see a non-chord tone that isn't part of the figure, or isn't a neighbor tone or a passing tone or an accented non-chord tone, I'm like, it must be an escape tone. But yeah, this chord is not really analyzable using tonal vocabulary. With more extended tonal vocabulary, we can call this, I don't know, like C, G, G, and D. It's like a sus2 chord. But this never, we never get the move up to E, so I don't think that would be right. We then have D, D, G, and A. That G is just a suspension. This is just a 5 chord that doesn't get realized until beat 2. So it actually gets turned into a fully voiced 5/7 chord on beat 2. So this B, this C, those are both non-chord tones at that point. And then C becomes a chord tone on beat 2. And then we cadence on 1, G major in root position with the G in the tonic as well. So all in all, this cadence is really fascinating here. I hear it as a sequential cadence because it's a bunch of 5th movement. It's like down a 4th, down a 5th, up a 4th. Yeah, and instead of going up a 4th, like, you can see that really this 5 is just a substitution for 7, because we could down a 5th, and instead of going up a 4th, he just goes to 5 via this passing tone here, this chromatic passing tone, the first chromaticism we hear in the chorale. And then he works his way back up to dun, dun, dun. So really this D is just a substitute for F sharp. This very easily could have been G, C, F sharp, but he avoids the tritone in the bass and cadences on 5 anyways, which is much, much more conventional. But here we have F sharp, B, E, and I think he's just sequencing his way through the harmonies in the key of G major. But the interesting thing that happens is that we never fully get that. 6 goes to 2 in the key of D major, which then goes to 5, which goes to 1. So he continues the sequence, and the numbers, or the Roman numeral analysis lines up, but that's cross key, so that would be different if we were to analyze this in G major terms. But it's kind of funny how the sequence continues numerically, even into the new key. Yeah, that's kind of cool. Maybe Bach was knowledgeable of that. We'll never know, though. That being said, that's today's analysis. I hope you enjoyed the video. This was a pretty straightforward analysis. I always look forward to the ones that are more straightforward, especially after days where I have more of a involved analysis that just takes more time. So it's a nice little palate cleanser that keeps me active, but still has a couple of little tricks and turns. Yeah, lots of passing 7 chords going to 1 after 4, which is really cool. I'm going to be more consistent marking those moving forward. And yeah, I'm looking forward to tomorrow's analysis. I hope you take care.